Think about it. Good afternoon. I'm Janice Sue Regal, President National of the National Society Descendants of American Farmers. And it is my utmost pleasure to introduce to you Ashley Morgan Oliveira. But beforehand, I'm going to let Renee come in and tell you a little bit about her. Davina and I met her at an invasive species class in the Woodlands. And I believe that you will find her presentation unbelievable. Thank you, Renee.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. And switch this. Okay. Hi, Ashley. Hey, I'm Renee, and we welcome you with us today. We're very, very excited. When our president national was telling me about the invasive species, I was like, oh my goodness, how fun. Let's learn about this, because I know we have had here in Tennessee issues with, and it's not necessarily the same thing, but we had those ground worms or whatever that came flying in, that came in on the wind from a storm and got into people's yards, and literally the yards were like moving. So ever since that, I was like, oh my goodness. And so when we learned about you were going to be presenting about on invasive species, that's the first thing in my mind that I went to, but I know your presentation is so much different. But I was very excited, and I'm looking forward to hearing everything that you have to share with us. You have your PowerPoint, and
Yes.
we'll have you set up for share screen. So I will turn it over to you, and thank you for being here. And we're looking forward to hearing your presentation.
All right, thank you. And go. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank y'all for inviting me. As Janice Sue said, I did a long workshop. It was like a 4-hour workshop that they attended in the Woodlands, and they thought what I was talking about was really interesting, and if I would come and speak to your group, and I was more than willing. Invasive species apply to every state in the United States. Actually, it applies to probably every country in the world. So I just really appreciate y'all taking time to listen to me today. Obviously, it will not be a 4-hour workshop, but just to give you a little bit of a background, I work for Texas Invasive Species Institute. So it may say Texas in the name, but our database has a lot of invasive species that are found throughout the United States, not just things found in Texas, but Texas has a lot of them. So it kind of applies to many states. So at TISI, we do a lot of early detection and rapid response. So we're actually out there doing field surveys for different pests, but we also work on enhancing public education, because if the public doesn't know what an invasive species is, how they're accidentally spreading them, then they don't know how to have better habits or how to stop what they're doing. So we're always willing to talk to any groups. And let me minimize that just so y'all can fully see my screen. Anytime you see this QR code, that's just a way to look at different links like our website that I'll be talking about, because even though if you may not be in Texas, we still encourage you to use our reporting database, because we can still help you get in touch with the correct authorities. So we have merged with texasinvasives.org. Basically, that means you Google Texas Invasives, you will find us. And this has been a partnership with USDA APHIS, Texas Parks and Wildlife, U.S. Forest Service, many different entities over the years. And that's how we have these relationships built. So the databases that I'm talking about are on 2 different websites, and that's just because we were historically 2 different entities and we haven't quite figured out a merge, because the texasinvasives.org right here on the left, that is our reporting database. So if I ever talk about please report this pest, I am talking about the texasinvasives.org platform. Both of them have invasive species lists, extensive lists. I'm only going to talk to you about a few species, but there are plenty. It's a rabbit hole, as someone was saying to me the other day. It'll be a rabbit hole if you start looking into what invasives are in your state as well. But you can always go to our website. We feature pictures, descriptions, talk about where their habitat is, how they might have been introduced, and how you can remove them from your property. So invasive species, I always kind of start at the beginning just to kind of make sure that everyone understands what an invasive species is. It's not exactly, and not all exotics are invasives. Not all ornamental plants are invasive, right? It's can be it's specific to certain groups, and the federal definition is a species that is non-native to the ecosystem under considerations whose introduction causes or is likely to cause economic harm or environmental or harm to human, animal, and plant health. So right here, you'll see there's been a couple of edits. This executive order was created in 1999 under Bill Clinton, and then it was amended in 2016 to include animal and plant health when they're talking about the harm that an invasive species can cause. So I always read and bold, that is the focus point of what separates an invasive species from a weed, from something that might be exotic. It's the harm that they can cause. And the harm comes in many different facets. It can impact our recreation, like zebra mussels and giant salvinia, human health, industry, economy, agriculture. So there's a lot of invasives that can attack our agriculture. A lot of boll weevils are out there, root nematodes, many different creatures. And then you have impacts to our lumber industry, so pine beetles, bark beetles, those kind. And then the impact to our natural heritage, invasive plants and invasive wildlife change our wildscape to where it's to their benefit and not to the natives. So sometimes the damage caused is very obvious. And the emerald ash borer, I like using this picture, even though it's, gosh, it's going on almost 20 years old, but it shows the impact that one beetle can have. This one street is lined with ash trees. 3 years later, the emerald ash borer arrives in Ohio and it clears out this entire street. So it also points to the fact that city planners maybe shouldn't be planting monocultures. So even us as humans need to be aware of what we're doing, because if there had been other trees that weren't ash species here, some could have been salvaged, right? It wouldn't have been this complete pulling out, complete removal of shade and habitat for all the, there are a lot of animals that live in our urban landscapes. Sometimes the invasive species can be small and we don't realize how significant their impact is. So I'm not saying an emerald ash borer is large, but the red imported fire ant is one of my infamous examples I like to use because it is one of those that has harm in many different facets. So it has a huge ecological impact. It attacks native ground dwelling animals. So that includes bobwhite white quails, horned lizards, so reptiles and birds, mammals, anything that nests on the ground is subject to predation by these ants, including our native ants. They also destroy crops, and in Texas alone, it costs our state $500 million a year just to manage. That's not eradicate, that's just to manage. And sometimes that is to control the health damages that these ants can also cause. They have a formic acid sting, and just like some people can be allergic to honeybee stings, some people and animals and livestock can be allergic to fire ant stings. So they also have that animal and human health impact as well. The thing about invasive species is if they caused harm, if we knew how to just get to it and stop it, right? So, okay, there's something bad happening. I'm going to go there. I'm going to isolate it. I'm going to trap it. Problem solved, right? The thing is that invasive species are also very good at what their name suggests, and that's invading. So they're often better at increasing in population size. Maybe they have lay more eggs, produce more seeds. They have 3 generations a year instead of 1. They're drought tolerant. That's a big one. Maybe they're tolerant of brackish water or high tolerant of salinity changes, or they're the ones leaching out the nutrients so they can survive in the nutrient depleted environment that they create. Either way, they're able to spread quickly. And so it's really imperative that we notice these things and try to be proactive. I use the lionfish again as another infamous example of what happens if we don't do anything, right? Us as humans. So in 1985, there was an aquarium in Miami, all very normal. They had lionfish in there. So lionfish are those beautiful spined fish that are still widely available for sale. You can have one in your aquarium. They do have parapolitic venom in their spines that can kill anything from small fish to large vertebrates like us, or even larger vertebrates like the native mammals and fish that live in the oceans. So there was a hurricane, a pair of lionfish got out. One pair, that's it. Genetic testing has shown they all came from the same descendants. So they have no predators. It's the 80s. If you think about the executive order, invasive species hasn't really been defined. So yes, maybe us researchers are thinking about it, but is the public, is the federal government? Not necessarily. And what can you do? They got out, they're in the wild. They were left alone, and it seemed pretty unassuming for the first 12 years, where they were just invading off of the coast of Florida. But again, we left and did nothing, and they continue to grow. They can produce so many offspring. The offspring instantly are able to eat anything smaller than themselves. And since they have almost no predators, they basically got introduced to an Atlantic and Gulf and Caribbean buffet. And because of that, they have been able to destroy our coral reefs because they're eating the fish that maintain our coral reefs. So now lionfish are found all the way from Philadelphia throughout the Gulf of Mexico, down Belize, and over into Venezuela. That's how widely extensive they can get. And that's just a really good visual of how quickly invasive species can spread, where it's like in 20 years, it now covers thousands and thousands of ocean miles. So how do they spread? I mean, a lot of things spread naturally. Seeds are often carried by birds, or maybe they stick to our clothing or their wind dispersal. As you know, many animals can fly or migrate, but sometimes we can't always explain the expansion. And that's usually because if you think about the lionfish example, how did the lionfish end up in Miami to begin with? Human assistance, right? A lot of it comes down to humans have been moving things for a very long time. So there's been a lot of accidental introduction of invasive species. So ballast water is how zebra mussels arrived. And then emerald ash borer arrived in wooden pallets. They were pupated in the pallets. It was nothing intentional, but there's still a lot of purposeful migration of invasive species. And the biggest culprits of that is ornamental. So the landscaping industry, and then also the pet industry, Florida pythons, pet industry. Apple snails are actually a big problem in Texas. That's another pet industry issue. It's just one of those, people are dumping their aquariums and they're not taking care of things. So the reason there's a lot of contradiction in your landscaping, so myself as an invasive species biologist, I might talk about different plants. The few that I am talking to you about today are mostly prohibited in many states, but you will go, if you go to our website, you'll see, I didn't know that was invasive, or wow, I can still buy that at the store. That's part of the problem. So a lot of things, if the plant is easy to propagate, easy to care for, it's also very pretty. And that's the kind of plant that I like. I do not have a green thumb. I have not come through that phase yet of my life, but that's also plants that are invasive. Invasive plants make a lot of seeds. They have high germination success. They grow fast. They're hardy, usually resistant to diseases. They're water wise. Maybe they're a generalist in habitats. So there is a lot of contradictions between industry and invasive species biology. So, I will tell you, please don't put any ligustrum in your yard or remove any that you see, but you can still go and purchase some from the store. The response to invasive species has been exponential in the past few decades. So that's why USDA customs, they are very thorough. A lot of things they still get through, but they're as thorough as they can be with import and export restrictions. That's why you can't come back with certain foods from certain countries. we as biologists are doing a lot of research. There's a lot of control and management, learning about restoration, but there's also the aspect of increasing public awareness about invasive species. So these right here are a few of the parks and wildlife programs that we support here in Texas. So we have a partnership with them. And so we often promote the Protect the Lakes You Love and Never Dump Your Aquarium, which those slogans can apply to any state. So while there is a lot of research and monitoring and restoration that's trying to happen on one end of the aspect of the spectrum, the other part of it is having engaged citizens that can help report or remove or just stay engaged and continue the outreach of invasive species, because it requires so much management and monitoring that us, you know, I say professionals, but us professionals can't do everything. We can only be in so many places. So there are many identification resources out there. A couple that I don't have listed on here that I should have would be bugwood.org. That's run out of the University of Georgia. They have an amazing invasive species. So like invasive.org or forestrypests.org, pestimages.org, all of that ties back to Bugwood. So they have a wonderful resource, but so does Galv Bay Invasives. Our websites also, they include identification resources. So they not only the website itself, but we often try to provide supplemental pictures. So what can you do? You can help stop the spread. Just being aware of what you're doing in your habits. So making sure that you clean, drain, dry. At least for Texas, it is a state law. I know it has become a state law in many others because the movement of zebra mussels and giant salvinia has been directly linked to recreational boating. That's not exactly how the invasive species arrived here, but that's how they further spread throughout the United States. So just being an avid boater, cleaning all of your equipment, and that even applies to when you're working in your garden, working on your property, just cleaning your equipment before you move to a new site can really limit the transmission of things. So don't move firewood is another important aspect that we try to point out to people, because some people are like, well, why on earth can I not move the firewood? Like that does not make sense. We're saying that in the sense of, did you have a tree die? Did it die from beetles? If you save that wood and then you share it with everybody else, those beetles are still in that wood. That can then spread. And that's been how the emerald ash borer has spread throughout the United States, was contaminated nursery stock and firewood, because, you know, it was one of those, we tend to be very reactive with invasive species. It's hard to be proactive, but also a lot of other insects can be moved that way. So it's really, you know, if you visit a state park, they have firewood for sale there. Buy it from the park, burn it at the park. If you don't finish all that firewood, donate it back to the park, because you shouldn't even be taking that firewood home, right? It's one of those, just don't move it, burn it where you buy it, and donating it back to the park. They could always use that extra revenue again. So just thinking about leaving no trace is a national campaign that really applies to me. It applies to invasive species and all, not just, well, humans in themselves are kind of an invasive species. So our presence in nature, but also thinking about if we're accidentally moving things around. So a lot of invasives are hitchhikers, so they move around in potted plants. And so just checking if you're bringing new things into your yard, just checking the soil or checking your yard immediately after. Being aware, just because it is for sale does not mean that you should be buying it. So just kind of being more aware of what you're bringing into your yard or on your property, or if you're trying to rehabilitate, you know, revegetate things, just being aware. And so a lot of commonly sold ornamentals are still nandina, ligustrum, bamboo, elephant ears, mimosa, honeysuckles, tree of heaven. I believe tree of heaven is prohibited in the state of Texas, and mimosa might be as well, but the others can still be sold throughout our state. And so each state is different. There are some that are federally regulated, but usually they leave a lot of that regulation up to the state. I will leave some information at the end. So we take action. We have a pest network that you can report to us about. So there are some emerging invasives in Texas. Some are here, some are not here. Some might be in your state if you're north of us. So it's just, these are species that we are actively tracking. And again, just because you're not in Texas doesn't mean that you can't fill out our reporting link and that we can't forward that information forward, because other states would care about this as well if you're not able to get in touch with other entities. So what this means is we just have a list of big bads that we want anybody to be able to report to us at any time. So much so that if you go to texasinvasives.org, this is our front page. These species are right there for you. It doesn't require a login, and you can also just click a Take Action tab, go to report it. There are two different ways you can kind of view them on the website, but those are our big bads, our Sentinel Pest Network, and those are ones that we encourage anybody to report to us. And in this case, no matter what state that you're in. So some of these, I tried to do their national distribution. So Japanese climbing fern is one of our sentinel pests. This is one that it was cultivated as early as 1888, being offered in nursery catalogs. So it first started in Florida. By 1903, it was naturalized in Georgia. This is one that is prohibited for sale in Texas, and it is present throughout the entire southeastern United States. So the reason that it's invasive is that it can cover shrubs from the ground and tall trees. The rhizomes that it grows through allows it to also form dense mats. So not only can it grow hundreds of feet up, it can also grow tens of feet thick as well. These dense mats, they smother plants and trees, and they also intensify fires. They basically create a fire ladder to the tops of trees. And in nature, wildfires are not supposed to reach the tops of the trees. It's to burn the understory. So it can also intensify fires to where they are negatively impacting everything. So this is actually a unique looking plant. It is a climbing fern. At least for Texas, we do not have any climbing ferns. I must admit, my background is more insects and animals, so I'm not sure of the vine habitats in other states, but at least for Texas, we don't have any climbing ferns. We have things like our trumpet creepers or the English ivy, these other kinds of vines, the Virginia creeper, that they're not fern-like, but this will look like a fern that is a vine as well. So its stems can be orange or black or green. They're going to be difficult to break, which is part of what makes it hardy. The leaves are doubly compound, but they're also really varied. So as down here, you might see that some have more of these finger-like projections on them, and then others at the end will have that more fern-like wispy appearance. So leaflets on the stalk tend to be more lobed, and then the lower leaf surface will have short curved hairs. So the fern spreads by rhizomes, but also they have reproductive spores at the end. So they do reproduce like ferns do, which is through spores and not pollen and seed. So it is important to just, if you see these kind of rough little reproductive fronds on the end, if you're going to be removing it, just be sure to be bagging these sorts of ends, because you don't want to be spreading them around too far and kind of further propagating it. But again, it can just have a really varied appearance, but it will look like a climbing fern, and it can go, this is a picture of a 80-foot pine tree that it's climbing up. The next one, a lot of you are probably already very, very familiar with this pest, but it would be remiss if I did not bring up that there is the emerald ash borer. So this is an invasive insect. It accidentally came here in wooden shipping pallets, was first reported in Michigan in 2002. Now it is present in every state Any state that has a color in it, the blue or the purples, that all represents the presence of where the emerald ash borer is. So this breakdown is kind of by counties in each state. Then, as the name suggests, this one inhabits ash trees. So if your ash is a fraxinus of any kind, a white ash, a green ash, not your maple ash, because that's an acer. So it's one of those, if you have a fraxinus tree, it is subject to infestation. For Texas, sadly, we have been experiencing a recent expansion. All of these states, if you, I know a few of you are in Tennessee, so you've probably already seen this. I know that I've seen this on my drives up to Wisconsin. You will just see dead trees along the way, and those are all ash trees. So the way that this beetle works is it lives inside the tree. It is a bark boring beetle. So adults emerge and they can fly. So the adults are actually capable of flying miles themselves. So they're very mobile. They will lay eggs on an ash tree. Those eggs will become larvae. The larvae are what chew through the bark and break up the circulatory system of the tree. The larva will then pupate over winter. So this is probably what was in those wooden pallets. They were immobile larvae, right? They were pupated in the wooden pallets. It was one of those, they weren't quite thinking about these kinds of threats back then. And then the pupa will emerge as an adult. The adult will either lay eggs on the same tree, or they can fly, I believe it's up to about 3 miles a day or more to find another ash tree. So unfortunately, this beetle is small, so a lot of it would come down to the health of your tree. How does your ash tree look? If it's starting to die from the top, so experiencing canopy dieback, maybe it's trying to resprout from the bottom. You're noticing these D-shaped exit holes throughout. And then once it reaches this stage, if the bark is sloughing off, the tree is done. It needs to be removed and mulched immediately. If you are in an area that allows you to burn, please burn the tree as quickly as possible, because you don't want to allow the beetle to keep living within the tree or jump to new ones as well. So it's small, it's smaller than a penny, but it is a unique beetle in the fact that we don't have beetles with this color combination is the easiest way. We have beetles that look exactly like this, but it will not have green outside wings. So the green elytra, it's a bright metallic green, and then the abdomen underneath. So if you lift a wing, and some people might be like, well, oh, I'm tearing off the wing of a beetle. Well, would you like to know if it's a really bad beetle or a normal beetle? Because it's important to know. So if you lift the wing, the underside will be coppery red or purple, so almost like a Christmas beetle. There are native Agrillus species. They are not as problematic. Oftentimes they are not on ash trees, but they do not have this color combination. Our native ones, the outer color is the same. The inner color is the same as the outer. So if you lift the wing, that abdomen will be the exact same color. It won't be this green and red combination, but also these will not be present on ash trees. Spotted lanternfly is another one that it's unfortunately making expansion. It is also a very mobile insect in itself. So this is this is a true bug. So it's not a butterfly. It is a true bug. So a hemipteran, kind of more. Oh, my animations. Okay. Like, where'd they go? Well, hold on. I need to show y'all the map. So we'll zoom out real quick. There we go. So in 2021 is where it was. So it was first reported in Pennsylvania in 2014. Pennsylvania, it started to expand. In 2023, it's jumped more states over here in the Northeast, but you can see it's starting to move. It's moving in both directions. It's moving both south and north as it's able to. I had some animation so it'd show that to you, but I wanted to show you all that this one is actively spreading. and partly is because it is a very mobile adult in itself, and it can live on a wide variety of different plants. So unfortunately, 2024 experienced expansion into Illinois, Tennessee, with sightings in New Hampshire and Vermont. So now it's confirmed in anywhere from, I think, around 19 states. And this again is one that was first reported about 10 years ago. It hitchhiked in potted plants, much like many invasive insects. So the threat of the spotted lanternfly for Texas, for us, we're really concerned about our grapevines, our muscadines, and then our winemaking industry. But other states have very valid concerns about their stone fruits, their cherry trees, apple trees. This insect can feed on all of those commercially important plants, but also a lot of economically important plants like lilac and maple and poplar and birch, a lot of those that are found throughout many different ecosystems. So what I always bring up when I'm talking about the spotted lanternfly is that the tree of heaven, the invasive plant that I mentioned, is still widely for sale or could be for sale in your state. This is one of the hosts that the spotted lanternfly can live off of. For the state of, actually, so I should have updated this one, apologies, but you can see that any green county is where the tree of heaven is. So it's present in the Texas winemaking art industry, but it's throughout Louisiana, Arkansas, Tennessee, Mississippi, goes over to New Mexico. So this is a widely planted ornamental. And so this creates a pathway for the lanternfly to spread throughout the United States. It's almost like we create home away from homes when we have invasive plants in our yard as well. It's not always about the plant itself, maybe what it's attracting. So the spotted lanternfly is very unique to identify, thankfully. It's about 1 inch, so it's a hardy bug. And I like to call it a little watermelon insect because that back wing just kind of looks like a watermelon slice with one of those eye spots. So it has brightly spotted back wings, and then the front wing is more translucent. The immatures themselves are very unique looking, so they're very black and white, kind of stark in appearance compared to others. And then they'll start developing more red on them before they fully morph into the adult.
They're
So
big
again,
jumpers.
I'm sorry?
They're big jumpers.
Yes.
They jump like 8 feet at a time.
Oh my goodness. Wow, so the larvae are really mobile too. That's pretty concerning. So the tree of heaven that I was talking about is one of the host plants that it really likes to survive off of. It's an ornamental that's been it was imported for over 200 years ago. It's found in 42 states. It itself is invasive in the fact that it overtakes sites. It produces toxins in the soil so that tree of heaven grows, but all of the native plants are not able to propagate. Its root system is so aggressive, it can damage sewers and foundations. It does have a very unique seed appearance. So the leaves are large. These leaflets are very large. They can be up to 4 feet long, of 25 leaflets. The flowers are kind of those nondescript green clustery things, but the seeds, oh, the seeds, that's how you can identify them. So they're the samaras. They're like a papery flat seed, but they're this beautiful pink and orange color. And I say beautiful because it is. And that's often why a lot of these things were moved around, is because somebody thought it was pretty and that it should come over. So giant reed is one of those, nobody thought it was pretty, but they thought it would be a good idea to use for erosion control. So this one you might have dealt with if you have any farmlands or any property that used to be, or any prairies or any ditches, you're going to see this in a lot of those areas. Giant reed is called that because it will grow giant. It can grow up to 20 feet. It's found in 32 states. It's widespread throughout Texas. And a lot of that is because many states planted it for erosion control. And unfortunately, this is one of those, if a fragment breaks off and moves downstream, it can replant. So if it's used in waterways for erosion control, that also facilitated its spread. So that's why you'll find it ditches, streams, riverbanks. It unfortunately it controls erosion so much that it completely becomes the ground. So it just completely overtakes habitats. It will choke off rivers to where other wildlife cannot use the creeks anymore because it is so densely packed with giant reed. And then again, a fragment can float miles downstream and reset. So that's something really important if you're going to be removing these in an aquatic setting. Just trying to make sure you keep all fragments in an area as possible in your boat, or if you're doing that approach. So giant reed, the leaves are a foot long. There's plumes happening right about now. Might have happened a little earlier for some other states, but they have 2-foot plumes. So these really big seedy plumes. The leaves are not very wide, but they're very long, and a lot of the treatment for giant reed is going to be repeat, repeat, repeat. Our Parks and Wildlife has a really aggressive giant reed campaign, and it's called a pull, kill, plant. And so they pull what they can, they kill what they can with herbicide, and they plant something in its place. So that's also going to be really important. But please, if you are using any herbicides, do it after flowering periods. So this one is not a fun one, but it is in a way of, oh my gosh, it's probably everywhere and we didn't know it. So the Asian jumping worm, or Invasive species, they're also called Alabama jumpers. So if you've ever fished and you see somebody selling Alabama jumpers, this is what they're selling. So it is an earthworm. It hitchhiked and potted plants. It's been here since the 1910s. It's been invading southwards. They're not quite sure where it was first found, but I know that Minnesota and Wisconsin have a lot of education and outreach about these worms. So it seems like it started that far northeast, maybe even Pennsylvania again. So it's moved around a lot because we didn't realize that this is something different than the European earthworms. So it's really important to note, and a lot of y'all might already know this, is that earthworms are not native to the United States. They were cleared out the last ice age, and colonists brought them over. So that's why many of them are called European earthworms. But these earthworms are much like the European honeybee, in which we consider them naturalized in agricultural settings because European earthworms, or red wigglers, they provide compost, they provide nutrient cycling, they provide a lot of benefits. Unfortunately, the Asian jumping worm doesn't provide any of that. They consume all the material to where they completely degrade it. It'll be left without the ability to hold moisture. It causes a lot of erosion. And also, these worms can reproduce twice as fast as our European earthworms, so they can also quickly overtake the same habitat as well. So look for a change in your topsoil. It's called a coffee ground soil because honestly, most of this is either dry dirt, like desiccated dirt, but a lot of these are egg casings as well, to where it'll go from your soft, squishy topsoil to this dry, crusty coffee ground soil. So thankfully, there is a difference between the worms, and this is something I've learned over the past few years, is obvious not every earthworm is an earthworm, in the sense of not every one of them is nutrient cycles, so there are bad ones. How do you tell the difference between the bad jumping worms and our normal or our useful European earthworms? It comes down to behavior. Jumping worms are called that because they thrash around, they wriggle around a lot. They kind of move around like a snake would if you disturb a garter snake or something. So its body is also going to be dry and sleek and smooth. It's not going to be kind of that floppy, slimy, you know, consistency that you expect of an earthworm. So its behavior is going to be a little different. Its appearance is going to seem off. And then if you notice this ring around their neck, that is also going to be the main way to tell them apart. So our European earthworm right here, it has more of a saddle. It's a clitellum and it's raised in the middle. It's pink. It only goes part of the way. So it's really like a saddle and on this earthworm. On the Asian jumping worm, the clitellum is more like a collar. It goes fully around. It's flush with the body and it's actually closer to the head versus being mid-body. So there's going to be a few different ways to tell those apart in behavior, appearance, and then down to that clitellum as well. But again, you can always go to our website. And also right here, I have Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources and University of Minnesota Extension. They do have a lot of good resources on jumping worms. One of the invasive plants that is pretty widespread and something that you might be dealing with a lot is the deep-rooted sedge. It's native to South America. It's a perennial. It grows in loose clumps. And I had always heard, so again, not being a botanist, I come from a parasitology, insect, animal background versus plants. And I kept always hearing, well, sedges have edges, sedges have edges. And I'm thinking, well, a lot of things, like, don't like all leaves have edges? I wasn't quite getting what that meant. And then I started learning more about invasive plants. I said, oh, sedges have edges. Their stems are strongly three-sided. So that's a good way to determine if you have a sedge. Highly likely you have deep-rooted sedge. I have some that it's a seed contaminant. That's kind of how it arrived here. But it will have those triangular sides on the stem. The flowers are going to be those greenish clusters, and the leaf bases, so where the leaves attach to the stem, are going to be a distinctive purplish black. And one of the last species before we briefly talk about how you can manage some is the hammerhead flatworm. Most of you have probably seen this in your state. This is one of those, I don't think it was starting to be called invasive until the past 15 years. My old graduate major advisor, she used to see these all the time in the 90s and 2000s in Huntsville, and always, knew them to be land planarians and always thought they were cool, and she would use them in her invertebrate zoology class. Well, it was one of those like, oh, this is an invasive species, because they started realizing it causes harm. So this is one that it's been here in the United States for a while, but it wasn't outright known. It was one of those, now it's known as an invasive species, but it wasn't even when it was establishing in Texas. So it's probably been in Texas for about 40 to 50 years. But the first hammerhead flatworm was first found in Pennsylvania in 1901, imported in potted plants. It then spread in greenhouses, and eventually it got out. So it is invasive because it's a predator of earthworms. And I know I just talked about how some worms are bad, and all earthworms are not native, and blah blah. The thing is, we want to protect the earthworms that we have in our agricultural and our garden settings. So we don't want to encourage these predators, because earthworms already have native predators here. We don't need to add another one into the food web. So it's also gotten some publicity because it secretes a neurotoxin, and that often makes people very scared to hear the word neurotoxin, which, yeah, that is a scary word. But it's important to note that the neurotoxin we're talking about here, it's to help digest earthworms, so very small invertebrate animals. That neurotoxin does not affect us, but still you could be allergic. So we don't recommend handling these with your hand, but you can. Many people do. It's just very important that if you see this flatworm, to please remove it from your property immediately. So managing invasive plants, a lot of it, and we talk about invasive plants because some of these animals will be more of, you have to just constantly, well, actually, it all comes down to retreating and maintaining. A lot of it's going to be find them early, do what you can to treat early, look at what's going to be the best technique. So maybe you are dealing with, Johnson grass on your property or other kinds of invasive plants or pests that I did not talk to you about today. Please remember, you can go to our website and we have a lot of management practices that you can use as a place to just start. And then it's really important to just plant natives. So a lot of mechanical is all, if you can use mechanical, please do. So hand pulling, weed wrenching is great for those things that are harder to get out. Consistent mowing or grazing can be great for some species, but others, it helps them spread quicker. So double check on our website if mowing and grazing is good. As I had mentioned earlier, when managing beetles, burning is good. Prescribed fire is also good if you're trying to manage large tracts of land, especially for rangeland and things like that. Obviously, you're limited by fire bans. And then tree girdling can be a very effective non-chemical way of doing that. So Cliff Tylick on YouTube, he's a Texas master naturalist, and he has done a lot of videos on girdling privets, and he's been able to clear out a few acres in Texas of privet. So it's been his videos are very insightful, and I definitely recommend. It's just a note here that girdling is really just exposing that second layer, that inner bark, so you don't want to dig too deep. But what you're doing is what bark beetles do. You are disrupting that circulatory system, so you're interrupting the tree's ability to circulate nutrients, and so it can provide a lot of effective treatment in areas that maybe you're not able to use chemicals or cut things down. If you are able to use chemicals, please be careful, not on a windy day, not when it's flowering, not when it's going to rain, right? A lot of those basic practices are really important. I like the cut and treat method. You can cut the tree and then apply herbicide. A lot of people will dye the herbicide so you can see what you're painting. And I say paint because I really encourage using a paintbrush to paint the stuff, because then you're limiting how much herbicide is going out and about. And what's really important about this one is just you have to apply that herbicide immediately after, like somebody's cutting and somebody is painting. Direct foliar spray is what a lot of people think of when they think of herbicide, is this stuff that, just gets sprayed, or, when the crop dusters come, and right, that's foliar spray that they're doing. And so that can be effective. Sometimes it is the easiest way if you have something that maybe it's too large for you to approach in other ways. It's just really important, again, if it's a windy day, if it's going to rain the next day, just those kinds of things be aware of. And do not do this when the plant is flowering. Never ever, because we need to protect our pollinators. If we're tainting, we may not want the invasive plant, but at least wait for the flowers to disappear before you use any chemical treatment, so that we know we're not harming the pollinators in any way. Basil spray is a spray that you well, that sounds silly. It's an herbicide. There you go. An herbicide that you spray at the base of a tree. And this is often very good for younger trees before the bark gets too thick. So again, this is kind of a non-mechanical. You can just spray it on the tree as opposed to spraying it over their leaves. You spray it on the trunk base. And then this is a mix of a little bit of both. So stem injection or hack and squirt. I tabled yesterday and someone asked, well, can I just like drill a hole and then stick herbicide in it? I said, actually, that's called a hack and squirt for their sake. And that's exactly what you do. You can take a hatchet, you can take something and you hack around the base of the tree, or you hack around the perimeter of the tree, and then you inject the herbicide into those wounds. Again, this will help the herbicide circulate more. There's less spraying application, but again, this would be, you don't do it on if rain is going to happen, and you don't want to do it when the plant is still actively flowering, because even though you are not spraying it on the flowers, there are studies that show herbicide can influence nectar. And so it's really not something to risk. So Again, if you're going to be using chemicals while the tree is still standing, so hack and squirt or foliar, just really don't do it during flowering periods. And then put something else in its place. Please, please. There's so many beautiful native plants that will go in its place, because a lot of our invasive plants are great at producing thousands and thousands of seeds that can last for 5 to 10 years. So they have a really good seed bank. So it's just important to put something in its place. And invasive plants and pests, again, sometimes it's not just the invasive plant itself, maybe it's what could be attracted to that plant. So just being aware of what's in your yard. Please, if you've ever had a tree die from any sort of beetle damage, native or not, you need to destroy that tree, because otherwise you'll just allow the beetles to stay on your property or to spread to your neighbors. So just being really aware of destroying any trees that you can that have been infested, and then just submitting any reports. So why would you, I know if you're not in our state, you're going to ask probably more why, but I get this question in the state is, why do I report to texasinvasives.org? I have things like iNaturalist and all of that. Well, we preceded iNaturalist, which is in a wonderful platform. Please report to us and iNaturalist. That is what I always encourage. But the thing is, if you report to us, we have direct contacts. We have direct links with the federal entities that can respond to these sorts of things. We're not exactly a management or a task force. We're more of a go-between citizens, and then we're our own boots on the ground, but we provide that connection. So if you report it to us, we're able to get it to the authorities a lot quicker. And that's just, again, those species that are on the front of our page at texasinvasives.org, or under the Take Action tab, you can click on the species. And when you do, a form will appear, and we really just need, ideally, your email, and the location is the absolute minimum of what we need. But it would be great if we could have your name and email and location of what you're reporting to us. And then if you liked what I was talking about, if you thought, I could listen to more about invasive species or read more about invasives, we do publish a monthly iWire. So you can go to our website, Texas specific. We cover a lot of just invasive species updates throughout the nation. And so if you sign up for it, that is all you will get, will be a monthly email about invasive species. And so I wanted to post some links up here, just some national reporting resources as well. So, if you're not quite sure there of whom to report it to, but obviously a lot of extension offices are going to be very helpful with this as well. But there are national plant boards. So you'll have certain entities that regulate plants and entities that regulate the pests or plant diseases. So they're going to be different, but nationalplantboard.org will have a list of plant regulators by state, and then pest or disease regulators, aphis.usda.gov, and plant health. That has a list by state of different plant health contacts. But your your state Department of Ags will probably have a contact, your state extension agency offices. And then the USDA APHIS, which is the invasive species branch of the USDA, has a specific hotline for emerald ash borer reporting or a specific form. So feel free to also go to these and just look up, in case you come across, especially some of y'all that are in states where things are emerging, like spotted lanternfly or emerald ash borer, just having these resources kind of available would be great. But again, you can always report it to us, and I will find a way to get it to the correct people. So I really appreciate y'all taking time to listen to me talk to you about a few species today. Again, any invasive species info or management that I was going over today can be found at our websites, texasinvasives.org or tsusinvasives.org. And you can report those big bads, those sentinel pests, even if you're not in Texas. You can still report it through texasinvasives.org. And if you would like me to speak to a different group of any sort, my personal email for any sort of workshop or outreach, or if you would like some handouts to share, just please feel free to send me an email. It's arm001@shsu. And with that, if we have time for questions, I'd love to take some if there are any.
I know Davina does. Davina has questions. You're still muted, Davina.
Thank you. I noticed in one of the brochures that we had from the workshop that tilapia is invasive. So what does tilapia do to be invasive?
Oh, the blue tilapia. That's a great question. I think a lot of it comes down to it just reproduces very rapidly. Like it reproduces faster than the native species, so then it's able to compete and consume more resources and kind of crowd out the native fish populations. I know that like brown trout and grass carp are really good at doing that as well. Just, they might have 3 generations as opposed to other fish might just have 1 in a year. And so they just they end up taking over and making up most of the population underwater.
Which is sold at grocery stores? Which ones are they selling then that people buy?
So it could be that there, and a lot of fish, well, brown trout and grass carp are bad examples of invasive fish because those were purposely brought in for various reasons. Brown trout was to replace because we overfished our own trout, and grass carp was brought to manage hydrilla, but blue tilapia is one of those, farm raised where it probably got out of aquacultures and then it started taking over natural water bodies and stuff like that. So I know that like any type of tilapia is prohibited for sale in Texas. So I'm not quite sure what kind of tilapia they sell. I'm actually not much of a fish eater. So I'm all like, what kind of tilapia is sold? How many tilapias are out there?
Okay, all right,
But
thank you.
no, that's a really good question because yeah, a lot of it is just they just outcompete. They just start eating all of the resources. and
Ashley, Margaret Powell said that the lanternfly is all over her area in Virginia.
Oh, I believe it. Oh, I
Margaret,
believe
you
it.
can
And
tell.
Virginia is one of those more recent expansions too, the past couple years, I believe. That's really sad. I'm
Yeah,
glad your name, I mean, please keep killing any that you see. That's all I can.
yeah, we only saw a few last year and we killed them and we reported. And this year it's like, you don't have to report anymore. But my neighbor, every day, she posts on our Facebook group, I have this many that I killed today. And I mean, she's talking like in the 20s.
For her.
Just in her little yard. Our yards are small.
Those they just swarm is what the pictures
Yeah.
look like. They just kind of come out in the
Yeah.
thousands.
And
It
there are a
seems.
lot of those trees that you were talking about that are the host trees, that a
Yeah.
lot of people are starting to ask how to get rid of those. So a lot of effort going into stopping them, but I don't know that it's working yet.
And I noticed that Julie Barnes has her hand raised.
Oh, thank you so much. My question is, I have been battling the Japanese beetle in my rose gardens, on my mom's grapevines, and even though the corn in the field is tasseling beautifully, they are they are now gone from my little area. But have they come out with anything better to try and get rid of them besides my fingernail and soap and water and a tennis racket?
So there are there is something that can be effective on a lot of pests, like insects in general, and it's that BT bacteria. So, and it's also more of a it's natural versus it's not necessarily a chemical, but it's a bacteria that attacks insects. And so I know like you can use BT, maybe mixing it with some water and spraying it on the adults and on the grubs, anything that you're kind of any of those beetle life forms that you're coming into contact with. But yeah, I know that BT is a nice natural method that could be that would be a stronger punch than just your hand and the tennis racket's a good effort. So I'm sure that packs quite a wallop. But yeah, BT might be a good option. So it stands for Bacillus thuringiensis, but big B, little t. And yeah, that can be a really good natural way. And it works on a lot of different pests.
And
So are
go
we?
ahead, Julie. Go ahead,
I
Julie.
am so sorry, Madam President. Are we supposed to spray that? When this first attacked, they were selling something that you could lay down where you saw these Japanese beetles, like now, and when the grubs come up next year, they would eat that and it would kill them. But I've not heard of it being successful in our area. So do we spray this BT, this natural thing now so that the grubs eat that, or do I spray this when they are active?
That's a really good. So there are still some, like, so BT, it can be left as like an emergent bait. So I think it's called like grub gone or something. So they do have it like a bait form, and then they do have like a liquid form that you spray that can be more curative. So the immediate impact, but also it's preventative as well. Because keeping that BT, it doesn't harm the plants. So if it's staying in the environment, that means the insects, the new the new grubs that are emerging, they're going to be eating that BT that's around. So there is a liquid that you can spray, and then there are also like those emergent baits as well. So maybe trying both aspects. But yeah, it does say that the liquid spray kit is an immediate response and then also preventative as well.
And one last question. These because they're natural, they won't hurt the butterflies and the honeybees. It'll just focus on the Japanese beetles. Do you know?
Let me double check on honeybee and that.
Here in Illinois, we don't want to
I
hurt
know.
anything.
Good.
Okay. Bacillus is okay so it kind of applies to this. So it's sort of the same with any other chemical is what it's saying. So you don't want to apply this BT when your plants are flowering. So
Okay.
don't apply it when your pollinators would be visiting it instead.
Okay.
So
Okay.
try applying it when those flowers are gone, because those beetles, those grubs, they'll start emerging first. They'll start being out. But if that BT is already out and waiting for them, they will be the ones to come in contact. But if you're spraying that BT when the plant is flowering, then yes, our pollinators can come into contact. So not during a flowering period. That was a really good question, because I was like, I thought I had that, but I wanted to triple check before. I was like, yeah, that's a really good point. It is effective on many kinds of insects. Yeah.
Davina.
My question is, Genesu and I had this beautiful drive yesterday north in Texas, and kudzu is taking over everywhere. So my question is, the trees that it grows on and totally covers, over time, does the kudzu kill itself because there's too much of it? I know it's going to kill the tree probably that it's on.
I kind of don't think so. I was like, no, what is that? It's almost like it's too big to fail, right? But
Uh-huh.
if you think about it as like a vine, well, it is a vine. It's a terrible, quick growing vine, but it's like as long as some part of that vine is getting some sort of sun,
All it
I
needs.
imagine it would be okay, even if it grows in these dense mats. So maybe the kudzu at the very first layer might be dying, but it'll just kind of keep growing. I haven't really seen any studies about like kudzu exhausting itself, which would be great. But yeah, I,
No,
I,
it's terrible. It's terrible.
Davina, ask her please about the grass.
Oh, we have our driveway. It's just a little area next to the driveway, next to the neighbor. And the neighbor has this grass. It's not really grass. It looks like a weed that's growing next to their San Augustine grass. And it all weedied my part, our part. And within a day, it's like an inch. Within 2 days, it's like 3 inches. And it's just, it's really pretty green, but it's invasive, obviously. I'll have to find out what it is. So the only way, I'm going to try and dig it out now. But with the neighbor having it in under her ornamentals, I don't think even digging it will work.
yeah, it'll probably come back. Depending on what kind of grass it is, because it could be a grass that grows by rhizomes. So even though you're pulling up the one part, it'll just grow more, or because you didn't pull up host plant, that it can keep rebutting, but it's worth a shot to try. But yeah, it's one of those, it's like if the threat is right there, it's going to be hard to keep it
I
off
think
your
we'll
property.
I know how to solve it. We'll just buy those beautiful flat stones and put there. That'll solve it.
There you go. Just no grass there,
Okay.
period.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Gravestones. Good. Any other questions? This has been magnificent, Ashley. Thank you so much. I will
Oh.
turn it back to you, Renee. But before we do, please, may I get a photograph of everyone? If you can turn your video on, please, that would be nice. Thank you. If you cannot, I understand. Great. All right. I'm going to give one more second. All right, here we go. We'll take 2 or 3. Thank you, smiling faces. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Ashley.
Thank
Loved
you
your talk.
Back to you, Renee. And then Davina, please give our numbers.
Thank you, Ashley. That was very enlightening. I was over here thinking, I wonder about my horse mint and all that stuff that I have to fight all the time. I go out and pull and dig up and it keeps coming back in droves. But we have been working on our speaker series for the next couple months. And I just wanted to let everyone know, September 9th, we had Valor Honeycomb for a follow-up from last year. And oh my goodness, the new things they're doing is just amazing. So that was very interesting. So be sure to look at our videos so that you can follow and watch that if you're interested. And then today, of course, we had Ashley. We have on October 2nd scheduled Mark Olson with Family Tree Maker. And for those of you that came to the first round, he's coming in with round 2. And I keep seeing a post from him that says, the new update's going to be here any day, that kind of thing. So be watching for that. Okay. And hopefully he'll have that. It'll be up and running by the time he comes for his part 2 presentation. And then on October 11th, we have American Vinegar Works, and they're going to be presenting literally on vinegar. But the interesting story, if you do have a chance to go to their website, just kind of read about how they got started. He will, I'm sure he's going to share that with us when he arrives, but it is very interesting to see why his rationale started for researching and doing vinegar on his own and what he had to do to get the proper machine and kind of the mechanics, all of that laid out so that he could actually start producing vinegars. So please join us for that. And that's on October 11th. always be sure to hit our webpage so that on Facebook, so which is separate, I guess, from our actual webpage, but our Facebook page is usually where we'll post upcoming video series, things that we're going to be sharing with you for the speaker series. And then don't forget, we do have our YouTubes that you can go back and see our archives of the presenters we have had. Do we have any other questions from anyone today about anything upcoming or suggestions? We still have November and December to finish scheduling out, but we're wrapping it up soon, you guys. We're coming to the end of the year. It's amazing to me. Oh, it's already the holidays coming. Oh, yeah. Oh. Any comments, questions?
It was great. Enjoyed it very much.
All right. Well, Miss Davina, would you give us your numbers, please?
Our beautiful count is 1,618. And thank you for telling your friends, etc. It's really working. We are growing. 1,618.
Wow.
Thank you so much, everyone. We look forward
great.
to seeing you at our next Zoom. And I do want to tell you what Renee was saying. The vinegar is phenomenal. Our next speaker, it is delightful. I had never thought that there would be a vinegar that would be just out of this world, but it is. So can't wait for that presentation. I'm going to shut the
They have fun doing it.